What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and I'm really thrilled to bring to you today investigative researcher and investigative journalist Michael Volpe, who resides in Chicago. Some of his credible work, he brings light to immigration-related things. He brings light to police corruption. And for the case of this show, I think some of his most valuable work that he's done and some of his most breakthrough work that he's done has been surrounding the secret family court systems and the trafficking of children through them, and how that all works. Mike has brought light to some other cases. Samantha Baldwin is one that he has communicated pretty often with. She has a couple podcasts with him also. And if you guys have watched this show, she has been a former guest, and you know from listening to her and the other parents that I've had on this show, how twisted and corrupt and inverted these systems have become. The thing that's hard to recognize or to ask yourself is how and why this happens. And I think that Mike Volpe has been one of the authorities in the entire world. His work has been seen all throughout the world on this topic. And I think he's one of the best people that breaks down how these systems work and gives some fantastic examples of stories that are actually current or that he has studied in his many, many years of research. Mike, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. Can we talk about Samantha then first?
Absolutely,
So,
yes.
you know what? Before that, we talked before we got on. I have a counterintuitive. I have a new site through Substack. If you don't know Substack, that's where Glenn Greenwald is at. Glenn Greenwald first broke Edward Snowden's, all of that stuff. Matt Taibbi, who was with Rolling Stone for a long time, is on Substack. I'm on Substack. You know what? I just got something from Substack. Some guy breaks down War and Peace. So pretty much you can find everything there. But one of the counter themes that I've been working on is, I believe, with the family court stuff and child trafficking, YouTube and other social media, as well as big tech, what we call big tech, and Zoom is actually a part of it, and I'll explain how. They are critical, and they didn't mean to, but they have supported the effort to bring these things to light. And in fact, you and I got to know each other, I guess, if you will, through Twitter. And if Twitter didn't exist, would I know you existed? Maybe. You know, I was introduced to a woman from England, Liz Perkins, who writes for the Daily Express. And I was introduced to her because I think at least two or maybe three people contacted me a number of ways to say she's basically the British version of you. And I remember thinking to myself, my friends in college would say one version of Mike Volpe is one too many. So the British version of Mike Volpe is a little too much. But and then I saw her on LinkedIn, and I asked her to be. I do a podcast, or I guess a live stream, we call it, with Megan Fox Wednesdays, starting at 11 Eastern. You can figure it out from there. And so she was on. We essentially compared notes. But I think I saw Samantha again on Twitter the first time. And so that's the thing about all of this stuff: YouTube, Twitter, Zoom. No matter where you are in the globe, on that platform, you're right next to each other. So I saw her, one of her videos on Twitter, became interested. And the more I watched it, the more obsessed I became, because she's from England. If you ever listen to her, it's pretty clear, because she doesn't speak like somebody from Chicago or New York. She speaks like someone from England. But her story is really similar to a lot of stories I covered, but specifically the main one, which is Sandra Grazzini-Rucki. So let me give you the similarities. Sandra Grazzini-Rucki is from Minnesota. You may have seen a show in 2020 called Footprints in the Snow. If you did, what you're about to hear was not in the show. And this is one of the similarities. Just like Sandra Grazzini-Rucki, by the way, goes by Sam. Samantha Baldwin goes by Sam. They both have brown hair. That really messes with my head. But they were both smeared by the mainstream media in their respective countries. Samantha Baldwin by the BBC, The Sun, others. Sandra Grazzini-Rucki by 2020, as I said, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, others. They were both falsely accused of parental alienation. They were both falsely accused of that after bringing forward allegations of abuse. Samantha's are more sexual in nature. Sam in America is more physical abuse. They were both chased by the elite law enforcement tracking unit. I can't remember what they're called in England, but they did track her, and Samantha told me that. Sandra Grazzini-Rucki was chased by the U.S. Marshals, and they both lost custody of their kids. I found like 6 or 7 commonalities, and the main difference, as I said, is one is in the US, one is in England. And that was the first time I noticed this might have a global component to it. And that's not to say that somebody's in a room saying we're targeting these women, but it's clear that the techniques are global. So the main theme of your podcast, if I understand it, is human trafficking.
Yeah, I would say
Right.
it's evolved into more child abuse in general. It started because that was my limited observance
Mhm.
of what this was trafficking, and it's gone off into, I've had like John Wedger on here talking about SRA, and it all
Mhm.
centers around trafficking though, and just child abuse.
Right. And so a lot of people who aren't familiar with this would say, well, how can you traffic kids through the courts? So
Yep.
before you understand that, the definition of child trafficking is the movement of children for money. So in order to move children through the courts for money, that means in a custody situation, you have changed custody and the only motive is financial, or it's primarily. In a CPS, Child Protective Services case, you have taken the kids out of the home, moved them into Child Protective Services strictly for a financial motive. So people who are long-term fans probably understand there is a potential financial motive. The first person to really bring this to light was Nancy Schaefer, the corrupt business of Child Protective Services. There are multiple laws, multiple funding streams. The first one is called CAPTA. In the 90s, it was the Adoption and Safe Families Act. There's parts of Title IV in the Social Security Act. It gets fairly complicated. However, when a child is taken and moved from the home to foster care, there's money. There's extra money if they're adopted out. There's all kinds of money. There's more money if they have other services they need in each state. For instance, I've looked at North Carolina. There's other financial incentives. So there's a law in North Carolina called Ryland's Law, which incentivizes in-home visits. Now, that may not be child trafficking, but and anecdotally, I've shown that that's what CPS does. They find a case, open a case, and find a reason to do in-home services. Why? Because they're probably getting more money for in-home services. So the hard part is, well, how do you prove that a child was moved, like custody was changed strictly for money? In each individual case, unless you have an email or you can prove bribery, I don't know that you can, but if you've shown enough of a pattern, for instance, when you look at Sandra Ruzzini-Rucki and you look at Samantha Baldwin and all of these commonalities, and a person who's clearly abusive is getting custody, got to ask yourself, what is the other motive? In fact, I I don't mention it that often. Samantha asked me, I don't remember how she framed the question. I said, I don't know if your judge was bribed. It just wouldn't surprise me if he was. The judge in the Rucki case, his name is David Knutson. I was actually told the amount, was told how it was done. However, it was done through Wells Fargo, was what I was told. And when I confronted Wells Fargo, the account that I was told it was in, they told me didn't exist. Supposedly it was done through the ex's, David Rucki's parents' trust, which moved, and what I was told was 750,000. They said the trust doesn't even exist. So I want to mention that now. I have David Knutson's email, and I've asked him this multiple times, and I've even put other people on the email, and not once did he say that it was untrue. And I would think someone accuses you of bribery, even in an email, and you didn't do it, someone should come out and say that is wrong. That never happened. This is a man of integrity. So the way I think you'd prove it is through the patterns. If you have enough cases where abusers who have corrupted the courts and a lot of money has funneled through, I think you can prove it that way. I think one case that I have seen, and this is one of the first ones that I was introduced to, is Sunny Kelly from Connecticut. And her ex, there was a lot of evidence of sexual abuse. One of the strongest is an incident that was witnessed by at least one doctor and then multiple other either nurses or the support staff. And the dad comes into whatever the hospital room is, sees the son, runs over to him and starts massaging his leg because it's compulsion. He couldn't help himself, even though multiple people are watching him massage his leg. He was still willing to do it. And then there's photographic evidence. Sonny said, my son's butt was shredded. Well, so what happened in the case? As soon as the allegations were brought forward, the judge appointed one court professional, appointed a second, a third, a fourth, and eventually it was more than 10. Eventually, Sonny spent more than $1 million, and the child was still moved to her ex, where he still maintains he's about to turn 18. So I would say if you are willfully ignoring sexual molestation in order to collect over $1 million, and we should note, and this organization is very key to all of this, most, not all, but most of the people involved in our case were affiliated in one way, either members of the group or trained by the group of the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, which is a global group of family court judges, family court lawyers, family court psychiatrists, therapists, everyone involved in family courts. It's like a shadow family court. So I think that's pretty strong, what I guess you'd call circumstantial evidence of child trafficking. If you are willfully ignoring the abuse and then constantly appointing your friends to also willfully ignore the abuse and then moving the child from the safe parent to the abuser, what do we call that if not child trafficking? So that's one example. The other thing is I've been exposed to now thousands of cases where very compelling evidence of abuse is ignored and the kids are forced to go to the abuser. One county that I've done almost a year now is St. Louis County, where just repeatedly they do that. And I was going to mention how is Zoom involved. I received what I can, I don't, if you consider document in a larger form, not just a document, but the single best document that I've ever gotten was like a file that was a video that was nearly 40 guardian ad litem, who are supposed to represent the best interest of the children, from St. Louis County, all on a Zoom conference that was secretly recorded, presumably by one of them, probably one of their staff. And I won't say how I got it, but I didn't get it directly, so I don't know who recorded it. And the person who gave it to me won't tell me for obvious reasons, so I'll never know exactly how it was recorded, even though I have it. So that was, Zoom is a great way to bring 40 people together, and these people thought that they talked about a lot of things. Now, number one, they talked about previous ex parte meetings they had with judges. They talked about a upcoming meeting with a judge. They talked about raising money and hiding the way they would raise it. They badmouthed litigants. They did all kinds of things that were either unethical or potentially illegal, and it became a very explosive thing as soon as they put it on YouTube. And
I
so,
heard it. I would have probably never heard about that story unless it was for you.
right. And also, but look, also YouTube, I see people when something happens and look, they banned you, which is just so ridiculous. Like a ban, you can't just remove the video in question. But
Right.
but on the flip side, I see somebody say, somebody removed some video from YouTube and they're like, this is what Rumble is for. And I was like, yeah, on Rumble, we get a fraction of the views. I don't believe for 1 second it's up to over 17,000. It'll be anywhere near 17,000 without YouTube, because you're getting the YouTube audience as well. On Rumble, you get their tiny, tiny Rumble audience, and it's just not going to be as big. But Zoom brings all of these people together. And again, on Zoom, you can be in Australia, you can be in Chicago, and you're right next to each other on Zoom. And it's another example of how technology is helping us. But Megan Fox, I then shared the video with Megan Fox and she jumped on board. This isn't a competition. I did get the video that started it all, but she has broken a ton of stories related to this. And if it wasn't for her, this wouldn't have gone nearly as far as it did. But I can't count how many examples of child trafficking. The one notorious one is the Vandenberg case, where the girl, starting, I believe, 5 years ago and ending just mere months ago is the last time, discloses over and over again that her father is a child molester. And get this, I think the divorce started in 2015. It was finalized in 2016. Just a few days after it was finalized was when the girl first disclosed. The mom then went to, Carolina's mom's name, went to modify custody because dad's a child molester. You would think that's a good reason to modify custody. And that opened up the case. And there was no guardian ad litem at that point. A guardian ad litem came in, Elaine Podlowski. She's the star, along with Sarah Pleben, of the Zoom conference. She did everything in her power to cover up the abuse. Other court professionals were brought in. Many years later, at the time that the girl disclosed, dad was getting every other weekends and maybe one weekday a month or one weekday a week which is the standard non-custodial time. They are now 50-50. And so I don't know if you'd call that child trafficking, but they're clearly covering up abuse for money. And that's not the only one. Angela Freiner, and in her case, I got a second grade audio that I turned into a video just by video recording the audio of her then 14-year-old daughter confronting a judge, Nicole Zellweger, and saying, "You can't send me to my dad. My dad's a child molester." And she sent them there anyway. And it was interesting. Angela recently told me in a podcast that I did for the Substack that her daughter disclosed to her sometime shortly before this confrontation happened. As soon as her daughter disclosed, she said, "You can't disclose to me. You've got to go to a teacher, because if I say it, I'm definitely going to lose custody." So she actually knew that if as a mom, I disclose this, I'm in trouble. And she's right. And that happens all the time. And in fact, I wrote, in fact, that was Sonny Kelly told me that lawyers, or at least one lawyer had told her that. In the article I wrote about AFCC, which is probably the most famous, it's called Making Divorce Pay. I can't remember, there's another woman who said her lawyer, who was AFCC, told her the same thing. And she has a case out of Maine. And her name slips my mind right now, but lawyers will actually tell you this. Don't report child sexual abuse. That's the quickest way to lose custody, even if it's true. So that puts you in a really tough position. You can't report the abuse because that's a great way to lose custody. And why does that happen? Sonny's story is basically the prototype, because the court uses that as an opportunity to open up the case, to bring in a bunch of professionals, then muddy the waters, and then they use their obfuscation to bring in more court professionals. And before you know it, you're the one being targeted. The abuse is being downplayed. You're told many things, and your custody time either goes down or erodes completely. In fact, Angela saw her daughter in court in November. She has not seen her face to face either before or after that since, I think, March of 2021, so almost a year. And she used to have primary custody. And so this allegation comes up, and next thing you know, she's completely shut out of her daughter's life. And parental alienation was what they accused her of. Parental alienation is what they accused Caroline of. It's what they accused him
What is parental alienation for people who are
of.
new
Right.
to that?
All right. So the simplest way to describe it is it's when one parent turns the child or children against the other parent. And this is a key part of the definition during a divorce or custody matter. So it's not actually supposed to happen when you're in the same home. Now, I have many problems with it, but before I get into that, if you've been exposed to, say, the abortion debate or the immigration debate, this is even more intense. And people will get into fights over this term. And the people who believe they were alienated, there's no common ground between them and the people who had it falsely used against them. And so to me, the behaviors associated with it are real. So, for instance, one common behavior that's associated with it is bad mouthing the other parent. Of course, that happens. In intact families, that happens. In fact, I venture to guess that most parents at some point have slipped up. So, but does that make it parental alienation? Now, if you said to me, parental alienation is when you give like a bottom line, you badmouth the parent to this degree, I would say, well, then that's parental alienation. The problem is that's not the only thing that's parental alienation. So the other one is when you coach the child to say they're being abused when they're not really being abused, which is very nebulous, because how do you know if they're not really being abused? And of course, that's in Sandra Bassini-Rucky's case, they never even said that she coached the children. They just said the children believe their father's abusive and we don't believe it, so that must mean they're alienated. So I did a case out of Ohio that moved to Florida, Julie Goffstein, and she was an Orthodox Jew. Her husband was an Orthodox Jew, and their 6 boys, they had 6 boys, were all Orthodox Jews. And one day her husband decided to be Christian, and the rest of the family said, well, we're going to stay Jewish. And he said, well, that's alienating to me. Now I can come up with hundreds of examples of these other uses for it. And so my biggest problem is whatever you want it to be. Whatever your case is, you say that's parental alienation. So the behaviors associated with, most of them are real, but you create this massive basket that anyone can just say they're alienated. And so Samantha Baldwin, I don't know exactly the details, but presumably you drugged your children and put it in their heads that they're being molested by me, and that's alienating to me. And the other thing is it's supposed to be like a disorder. It's parental alienation syndrome. They've knocked off the syndrome. They just call it parental alienation. Um, if it's a tactic, if it's something that's used, that's one thing. But if it's a disorder, that means there's something wrong with you. So there's all of these technicalities that the proponents say, well, whatever, who cares? It's still real. I haven't seen my kids in a long time. They hate me. I haven't done anything wrong. How can you say parental alienation isn't real? And I always say, well, what is it? If you tell me what it is, I'll tell you if it's real. And it's very hard to define, and so it gets misused a lot. So I would rather people, and it's not that hard, just say what happened to you instead of saying I was alienated. And so I always use, and this pisses people off that are proponents. I always say it's like, I choose a color. It's like gold unicorns. It's as real as gold unicorns, because if it's anything you want it to be, then it's nothing. And so I would say, if not the main use of child trafficking, it's certainly a main use, because anytime an abuser gets accused of abuse, that's a go-to. It's absolutely a go-to. They don't use it every single time, but they use it a lot. And as a result, you can muddy the waters. It's interesting. Sonny Kelly was accused of it right in the beginning by a lawyer. The term was never used again. They ran around the term, but they would say things like, you get off on thinking about your son being abused. You're like a French whore. And they were basically accusing her of parental alienation without using the term. Sometimes they'll do that because it's an explosive term. So rather than saying parental alienation, you just jump around it. But out of Connecticut, another woman named Susan Skip was also accused of parental alienation. She had her car blown up. She was beaten up. And it was specifically parental alienation. I think she had like 4. Remember, Sonny had over 10. Susan, I think, had 6 or 7 of these court professionals come in. 4 were the same for both cases. And so these child traffickers, they have their go-to thing. But I did a case out of Ohio. Now the county, I can't remember the county, but the way the woman was accused, they may as well have called it parental alienation, except they said she was histrionic, which is ridiculous. Like, you're hysterical. And it was that her kids disclosed, and we don't believe that your kids disclosed. You must be histrionic. And I think they're basically saying parental alienation without saying parental alienation. So that's another thing. They can label you whatever they want to label you, and basically use the same set of traits to label you. There's at the time, a pretty famous case out of Minnesota, Holly Collins, that started in the 90s. And she wound up fleeing to another country, which let her stay. And she accused her ex of some sort of abuse. The court didn't believe her, and they labeled it Munchausen by proxy. And if you know a lot about parental alienation, when you look at the details of the case, if you replace Munchausen by proxy with parental alienation, it's not really going to sound any different. So it's almost like in the 90s, these sets of traits, their go-to term was Munchausen by proxy, and then it evolved to parental alienation. But this is how the courts engage in child trafficking. They label you with these labels. As soon as the abuse occurs, they appoint a bunch of people, like a guardian ad litem, a custody evaluator, parenting coordinators, a million of them. And depending on the state, there's all sorts of different court professionals that can be used. I've more recently gone into Orange County, California, which is right next door to LA. And one of the cases I covered is Christy Black. And her ex, before they met, was involved in a major ecstasy ring with a man named Sammy the Bull Gravano. If you're not familiar with him, he was the one who ratted out John Gotti, admitted to 19 murders, did 5 years, got out, went to Arizona and started this ecstasy ring. And her ex was one of the people who put him back in jail. I don't remember how many years he did after that, but many years, more years, ironically, for doing the ecstasy ring than killing 19 people, right? So, he accused her of parental alienation and was eventually able to switch custody for some long period of time, and they ignored it. And there was physical abuse as well. But if a man who once ratted out Sammy the Bull Gravano can effectively use parental alienation. Just about anybody can. And that's how prevalent it is. And one other thing people should know, there was a book in the early 1990s written by a man named Dick Hart. So that's clearly a pseudonym or a pen name. I don't think his really name Dick Hart, called Screw the Bitch. And it's become a father's rights manifesto. And abusive men read it and use the techniques. And they didn't even use the term parental alienation, but they did refer to things that are like it. But there's a bunch of techniques that are used that you see. And I believe that these virulent fathers' rights people read it, their attorneys read it. And if you have been the subject, and especially you're a female, of aggressive court tactics, you should read the book, and you'll be startled by how many of those tactics were right in the book. And your ex either read it, or maybe they talked to someone who did, or whatever it is, it's either a direct or indirect link to that book. That book has done so much damage, you just can't imagine. It's interesting, the book at times has very practical advice. Like it says, if lawyers who promise you the world, you don't want them. You want to try to see how they operate in court. That's practical advice. You should try it. You shouldn't. If a lawyer promise, and he even I assume it's a man who wrote it, even says the first thing you should do is try to settle. But he goes through the steps. But then he's like, but if you really want to go after, here's how you really go after. So it's not a like completely virulent father's rights book, but a lot of parts are. And so a lot of these techniques, and as I said, they didn't use the term parental alienation, but they did describe things that were like it. And at the time, 1990s, it was in use, but not that much. So he may just not have been aware that it was termed that. It really got popularized in the 90s and going forward. But I believe the misuse of parental alienation is either the top or one of the top reasons why there's so much child trafficking, because as soon as abuse comes about, that's the go-to response. And once you have that go-to response, it opens the court process up. And I've seen it, as I said, all around the world. Megan and I interviewed another, I think his name is going to slip my mind, which is just so terrible. He's out of Australia. And he said he's studied courts all around the country, all around the world, and definitely in Australia and other parts of the world. I found, and I can't find it anymore, but there was a study from France that found the misuse of parental alienation in their courts. Read a lot of articles out of Canada with the same thing. Spain actually barred the use after several high-profile cases. And when you say high-profile, it's cases where abuse is alleged, the abuser alleges parental alienation, the court gives the abuser custody, and then something tragic happens, like the child is dead. In fact, Thomas Valva, that's a case out in New York. It's not highly publicized, but I saw at least one court document where the term parental alienation was used. I don't know how prominently it was used, but yeah, that was part of the reason that this guy got custody. So that's definitely one of the reasons that you see all this child trafficking, and that's exactly what happened in the Rucky case. Basically, and if you saw it on 2020, the way Sandra Rucky was painted as a vindictive ex-wife who's hiding the kids, keeping the kids from a good dad, and we know this because we interviewed the oldest son who told us he's never seen his father be violent. We did. Nico, that's his oldest son. He did go on camera, and I'll talk about it. And he even suggested that this Facebook post that he put up where he said his father was abusive was like encouraged by his mom. Well, he was a teenager when he made this post. You really believe like a 13-year-old would write his dad's abusive? He's not, just because his mom is saying it. What you all should know is, number one, there's a document that's on the internet that's 99 pages that I call a dossier of like police reports, protective order documents, photos, letters of numerous incidents of David Rucky being violent, not only towards his family, towards others. There's another 25-page document of CPS reports, including one on page 15, where he's alleged by the same Nico of sticking a gun to Nico's head when he's 8 years old. On top of that, I was able to get therapist notes, which was my favorite document until I got the Zoom conference. And in the therapist notes, his two sisters who wound up running, his two younger sisters, but the two oldest girls, Samantha and Gianna, Sammy, they call her, was named after her mom, obviously. But accusing Nico of being bought off by their father, where they said, you've only started saying dad's not violent after your father bought you a car. And we know dad bought you a car because mom doesn't have enough money to buy you a car. So he used to say his dad was violent. Then his dad bought him a car. And now he's saying his dad's not violent. And by the way, he testified in Sam's criminal trial and said these same things. So that's perjury if in fact the only reason he was doing it is because his dad bought him a car. And the court basically wouldn't allow any evidence of abuse in. There's a very famous video, there's no audio, of Sam's divorce custody attorney, Michelle McDonald, being wheeled in, handcuffed to a wheelchair and being forced to get up part of the custody trial, handcuffed to a wheelchair. If you watched, it's called Footprints in the Snow, you didn't notice that because that was left on the cutting room floor. I've talked to Michelle, she told them all about this. She expected it to be a part of the broadcast. It wasn't in there. They gave them mountains of evidence. There's a 2014 incident where David Rucky's on a road. This guy cuts him off. Rucky, hits his beep thing, and the guy gives him the middle finger. So he follows the guy into this parking lot and beats him up, and then he goes shopping, and then he gets arrested. And he was wound up being charged with disorderly conduct, even though it was assault, because David Rucky somehow is able to do that. And in fact, he was still on probation for that disorderly conduct when he got his two girls back. Because the oldest girls, one of the reasons why the case became so famous is because the two oldest daughters ran, and they were missing from 2013 to 2013 through 2016. And it was about 2.5 years, if I'm doing the math correctly. And I always get the math off, but they were no, I'm sorry, 2013 through 2015. The April 19, 2013 through sometime in November 2015. And so the girls ran because they were going to be forced to live with dad. And this is another, by the way, this is another thing that they didn't mention in the 2020 broadcast. This custody trial that they refer to was done, I guess, in absentia, because at the time the custody trial was happening, 2 of the kids were missing. So it doesn't matter what you say about custody, 2 of them are missing anyway. They're not going to follow your orders. And the other thing that people should know, if you follow the case now they claim that Sam kidnapped the girls. Well, she didn't kidnap the girls. Number one, because she wasn't charged with kidnapping. It's parental deprivation. Number two, because at the time, the girls were actually interviewed days after they ran, and they said they ran. All right. And there's audio of the woman that I got. Her name is Lori Musoff, who, and I should note that this is important. So the girls run on April 19, 2013. A couple of weeks later, a 9-minute news story is done on them. But within days, they are interviewed for this news story that's done a little later. And Lori Musoff, who was an activist who betrayed Sam, because there's audio of her talking to the cops explaining how this happened. The girls started calling her and said, we heard you can help. And she knew a reporter at the local Fox, and she set up the interview. And then they did this interview. And even when 2020 did their broadcast, no one suggested that Sam was holding them by force. Everyone believed that these girls ran. And now what you hear is they're trying to claim that it's kidnapping. And why? Well, if it's kidnapping, then nothing else needs to be explained. Terrible woman, she kidnapped her kids, kept them away from her ex. If they ran willingly, then a lot of people are going to say, well, if this guy's so great and he's the victim, why would his 2 daughters run? And so that's why they're doing it. David Rucky has a chief propagandist. His name is Michael Broadkorb. He runs a website called Missing in Minnesota. He has a book that he's claimed has sold 30,000 copies. It's full of lies and misleading information, all kinds of things. Michelle McDonald has had a sterling clean record until she got on the Rucky case. She's had her license suspended twice. The last time I watched an 8-hour hearing, 8 hours, right? So one of her clients complained because he may have had to overpay by $50, kid you not. So they had like 2 hours on him because it gets into legal technicalities, because she used a legal word, which means it's like a flat rate, but she charged him 50, and then the flat rate was supposed to be 500, and he paid 500 plus 50. So it's not a flat rate of 500, but come on. And then The second charge was that she brought a frivolous lawsuit, which you're not allowed to do as a lawyer, against Michael Broadcorp. And the third charge was that she said something mean about a judge, David Knutson. And that was the only charge that she was found guilty of. And when Michael Broadcorp testified, he said his job is to follow this case, to do everything related to this case. And the case has been over for 6 years. So even 30,000 copies of a book. He's been following this case since 2015. That's not a lot of money over 7 years. Who's paying him? There's only one person who benefits from it. There's only one person who has enough money to pay him, and his name is David Rucky. And no one seems to want to ask Michael Broadcorp this question. So he is one of the people who's now constantly saying it was kidnapping, it was kidnapping, it was kidnapping, even though the girls have described how it happened, that they ran, that they called their mother on April 19th, that they said, we're running with or without you, that she felt she had no choice, that she took them to a woman named Dee Dee Evold's house. And Dee Dee Evold knew a woman named Dolan is her last name, who ran a horse farm for abused children in another, Herman, I think it's called, Minnesota. They were taken there. They thought it would be only a couple of days, because what they thought they would do is leave them, Gina Dolan, Doug and Gina Dolan, who were also charged, spent 60 days in jail. And by the way, the girls used their real names the entire time they were at this horse farm for abused children. That's 2.5 years. Everyone in town knew who they were. This case was pretty famous. I'm sure more than one person knew exactly who they were. No one ever called the cops. Why? Because they probably told them the truth and they believed them. Meaning that the people in town, regardless of what you hear in the media, thought that David Rucky was abusive and we better protect these girls. So initially, they thought it would only be a few days, because what they would do is have the girls stay with the Dolans, create media attention. Obviously, the judge will back off once there's some media brought to light. And that's exactly what happened. The judge wouldn't back off. And then the girls stayed. Sam has been criticized because she, on occasion, would call the Dolans, would never actually talk to her daughters. And and I've talked to her about this. She's tracked. She's worried that any calls would be tracked. And her main concern was to keep the girls safe. And how were they found? I don't know if I can remember his name, but she was working in in an unofficial manner with an old disbarred lawyer who was disbarred after a domestic violence victim was in hiding, and they demanded he give up her location and refused to do it. He, sometime before April of 2015, which would have been the 2-year anniversary, called a guy named Brandon Stahl at the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and he was with Sam the night that they picked up the girls, and he told them what happened, because he thought that Stahl would do an honest piece for whatever reason, and Stahl did a hatchet job. And by the way, Stahl had never done one story on it, and she has provided me emails of her in like 2014 and even 2013, 14, and 15, asking Stahl to do something on this story, and he refused. But then when this guy called, then he didn't refuse, and so he does something on the 2-year anniversary, as if you would, as your first story, do something on the 2-year anniversary, and that's what restarted the investigation. And then the girls were found months later. And that's probably the best example of child trafficking. And I've gotten so many documents. There's case fixing in that case. The custody trial happened in September 11th and 12th of 2013. There's a document from late August of 2013 from David Rucky to the school the girls would wind up going to. And it says, father will have full custody. Now, how would you know you'll have full custody before the trial happened? Unless you know the outcome of the trial before it happened. As I said, her lawyer being forced to part of the custody trial, handcuffed to a wheelchair, is another one. When Sam was charged criminally, she went in front of a woman named Karen Asfog. And I'll never forget when I found this out. I think it was September of 2009, David Rucky swore uncontrollably at 2- and 3-year-olds that were with his neighbors. And his neighbors called the cops, because you can't swear at 2-year-olds. And he was eventually charged with disorderly conduct. And the judge who heard this criminal case was Karen Asfog. And on the eve of trial, she dismissed it. And it's called sua sponte, meaning there was no motion in front of her to dismiss it. She did it on her own. She dismissed the case for lack of probable cause, even though there was multiple witnesses, multiple police reports. And then she just happened to wind up on his ex-wife's criminal case. Now, when I called the court, I asked if Karen Asfog was on Sandra Grazzini-Rucky's case. Now, this 2009 case, was she on it as well? And the defendant was David Rucky. I think someone above your pay grade is going to have to talk to me now, because that's really bad. And that's pretty compelling. What's called circumstantial evidence that Karen Asfog is being bought off by David Rucky. And more recently, she gave David Rucky a 50-year protective order against this woman, Dee Dee Evervold, because Dee Dee Evervold was not supposed to be saying things on the internet against him. So she's basically not allowed to ever say his name or his kids' names until 2069, 50-year protective order. I recently heard about a lifetime protective order, but this is a 50-year. And so Asfog winds up on his cases a lot. So did, by the way, David Knudsen. There was an incident where David Rucky screamed and threatened to kill an in-law, and the in-law called the cops and tried to get a protective order, initially did, and then it was dismissed by David Knudsen. And there's another incident, and this one's really interesting. David Rucky put a global positioning system device underneath the car of a friend of Sam's, his ex-wife, who lived in a neighboring county, Scott County, and that initially turned into charges. And David Knudsen moved the case from Scott County to his county, which is Dakota, and then had it dismissed. But somehow he's also on a divorce and forces the lawyer to conduct part of the trial handcuffed to a wheelchair. Pretty interesting. Is it child trafficking? Is it case fixing? Is it both? It's definitely corrupt. See, it's hard to know the exact definition because I don't have the smoking. If I can prove that bribery was in play, then it's child trafficking because you did all of this for the bribes. I can't prove it. I'm pretty sure I've been told how it happened, but I can't prove it. Is it case fixing? I don't know if I can prove it, but that one document from before the trial happened, where he says he will have full custody, and he does get full custody, seems to be pretty compelling evidence as well. And look, that's the most, I'd say, like, notorious case, but I've covered cases with variations. It's all around the world because I've talked about Samantha Baldwin's case. And by the way, Samantha Baldwin's case is very similar to another case in the US out of North Carolina, Joanne McDowell. And so Joanne believed that her ex-husband was drugging and molesting the kids. Does that sound familiar? That's exactly like Samantha Baldwin's case. She begged and pleaded for the court to do a drug test. They finally agreed. When that drug test came back positive, they said, you must be drugging them in order to frame your ex-husband, which is exactly what happened in Samantha Baldwin's case, except Joanne's happened out of North Carolina. I've done a lot in North Carolina as well. And there's a whole bunch of cases. And they cover up child abuse on a pretty mass level in North Carolina as well. And like I said, the Rucky case is like one that I've covered for a really long time. And but there's variations of it all around the world, but certainly all around the country. I call it child trafficking. When you show like tens of thousands, maybe they're not all, but the mere number says there's child trafficking and certainly court corruption. And the reason is multifold. Number one, there really are no rules. Number two, there's not nearly enough oversight, including from the media. And number three, not nearly enough people who aren't going through the process care. But all three of those things are changing, and not that slowly anymore. I don't think you can say in our conversation as a part of this that no one covers it, because you and I are covering it. And we're not the only ones. And you said a lot of men don't cover it. There's a guy named Mike Hixenbaugh from NBC News. That's not a small outfit. He's an investigative reporter. He's, for now, sticks mostly to CPS related matters, but has covered doctors forming misdiagnoses of child abuse being covered up, kids being taken needlessly from CPS. And they actually turned that into a podcast as well as many news stories. Podcast is called Do No Harm. So you can't even say that the mainstream media doesn't cover it, because obviously they do. Mike Hixenbaugh is just one example, and he's a male, and he does great work. I do things that I think that things are changing, and I firmly believe that social media is one reason. Big tech, social media. When we look back, you'll give credit to Facebook, to Twitter, to YouTube for being a conduit to this. And I don't know if it's a tipping point, but less and less people are unaware that these things are happening, whether it's happening to them or not, because it's the 6 degrees of separation. The people who this is happening to are bolder and bolder. And so they talk to more and more people. So even if you aren't personally affected, you probably have a friend or a neighbor or a family member who you're aware of. And as a result, I think more and more people are aware of this. And so I don't know when the tipping point is coming, but it's not that long. I'd say 5 years at the most. And then I think it'll break wide open. So we'll keep covering it until then.
I'm so grateful that you came on. I'd love to have you on again because I think that
Anytime.
I'm sure I'll get more questions, and I know I have additional for you too that I think we could do another episode on. But in the meantime, thank you so much for coming on here. This was such an honor having you. And gosh, you share so much valuable information for people. Where can people connect with you if they want to learn more, or if they want to ask you questions personally, or even invite you on their podcast?
So my email is mvolpe998@gmail.com, and my work is found at michaelvolpe.substack.com. And connect with me there. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter at Mike Volpe, and find me on Facebook as well.
All right, I'll share all of that in the show notes. And in the meantime, thank you so much for being here with me, Mike. It's an honor getting to share this with you, and I appreciate you sharing with my audience.
All right. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We'll see you guys next week.